The Karabiner 98k's Carbine 98 short, often abbreviated KAR 98k or K98k, is a bolt-action rifle chambered for the 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser cartridge that was adopted on June 21, 1935 as the standard service rifle by the German Wehrmacht. It was one of the final developments in the long line of Mauser military rifles. Although supplemented by semi- and fully automatic rifles during World War II, it remained the primary German service rifle until the end of the war in 1945. Millions were captured by the Soviets at the conclusion of World War II and were widely distributed as military aid. The Karabiner 98k therefore continues to appear in conflicts across the world as they are taken out of storage during times of strife. History. In February 1934 the Heereswaffenamt, Army Weapons Agency, ordered the adoption of a new military rifle. The Karabiner 98k was derived from earlier rifles, namely the Mauser standard model of 1924 and the Karabiner 98B, which in turn had both been developed from the Gewehr 98. Since the Karabiner 98k rifle was shorter than the earlier Karabiner 98B, the 98B was a carbine in name only, a version of Gewehr 98 long rifle with upgraded sights. It was given the designation Karabiner 98 Kurs, meaning carbine 98 short. Just like its predecessor, the rifle was noted for its reliability, great accuracy, and an effective range of up to 500 meters, 550 yd, with iron sights and 1000 meters, 1090 yd, with an 8 times telescopic sight. The desire for adopting new shorter-barreled rifles and the introduction of the Karabiner 98k, featuring a 600 mm, 23.62 in, long barrel, were reasons for changing the standard German service ball rifle cartridge. The 1903 pattern 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser S Patroni produced excessive muzzle flash when fired from arms that did not have a long barrel like the Gewehr 98. It was found that the SS Patroni, originally designed for long-range machine gun use, produced less muzzle flash out of rifles that had a shorter barrel and also provided better accuracy. Because of this the S Patroni was phased out in 1933 and the SS Patroni became the standard German service ball cartridge in the 1930s. Design details. Features. The Karabiner 98k is a controlled feed bolt-action rifle based on the Mauser M98 system. Its internal magazine can be loaded with 5 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser cartridges from a stripper clip or 1x1. The straight bolt handle found on the Gewehr 98 bolt was replaced by a turned-down bolt handle on the Karabiner 98k. This change made it easier to rapidly operate the bolt, reduced the amount the handle projected beyond the receiver, and enabled mounting of aiming optics directly above the receiver. Each rifle was furnished with a short length of cleaning rod, fitted through the bayonet stud. The joined rods from 3 rifles provided one full-length cleaning rod. The metal parts of the rifle were blued, a process in which steel is partially protected against rust by a layer of magnetite, Fe3O4. Such a thin black oxide layer provides only minimal protection against rust or corrosion, unless also treated with a water-displacing oil to reduce wetting and galvanic corrosion. From 1944 onwards phosphating/parkerizing was introduced as a more effective metal surface treatment. Sights. The impractical Lang Vizier or roller coaster rear sight of the Mauser Gewehr 1898 was replaced with a conventional tangent leaf sight. The Karabiner 98k rear tangent sight was flatter compared to and does not obstruct the view to the sights during aiming as the Lang Vizier, long sight. Originally, the Karabiner 98k iron sight line had an open-pointed post-type front sight, and a tangent-type rear sight with a V-shaped rear notch. From 1939 onwards the post-front sight was hooded to reduce glare under unfavorable light conditions and add protection for the post. These standard sight lines consisted of somewhat coarse aiming elements, making it suitable for rough field handling, aiming at distant area fire targets and low light usage, but less suitable for precise aiming at distant or small point targets. It is graduated for 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser SS Patroni cartridges loaded with 12.8 grams, 197 gr. SS, Schweres Spitzgeschoss heavy pointed bullet, ball bullets from 100 to 2000 m, 109 to 2187 yd, in 100 m, 109 yd, increments. Stock. Early Karabiner 98k rifles had solid walnut wood, or from 1943 some had solid oak wood one-piece stocks. From 1937 onwards the rifles had laminated stocks, the result of trials that had stretched through the 1930s. Plywood laminates are stronger and resisted warping better than the conventional one-piece patterns, did not require lengthy maturing, and were cheaper. The laminated stocks were, due to their dense composite structure, somewhat heavier compared to one-piece stocks. In addition to the use of walnut and beech laminate, elm was used in small quantities. The butts of the semi-pistol grip Karabiner 98k stocks were not uniform. Until early 1940 the stocks had a flat butt plate. After 1940 some stocks had a cupped butt plate to prevent the separation of the butt stock. All stocks had a steel butt plate. Accessories. When issued, the Karabiner 98k came accompanied with assorted accessory items including a sling, a protective muzzle cover, and for field maintenance a Reinigungsgerät 34, cleaning kit 34, or RG34 kit. Introduced in 1934, the Reinigungsgerät 34 consisted of a flat 85 mm, 3.3 in, wide by 135 mm, 5.3 in, long sheet metal container with two hinged lids carried on the person, which held an oiler, a takedown tool for removing the floor plate and cleaning the receiver of the rifle, an aluminum barrel pull-through chain, a cleaning and an oiling brush, and short lengths of tow used as cleaning patches. From 1905 until 1945 the German military used Ballistol intended for cleaning, lubricating, and protecting metallic, wooden and leather firearms parts. The Karabiner 98k rifle was designed to be used with an S84/98-3 bayonet. The S84/98-3 had a blade length of 252 mm, 9.9 in, and an overall length of 385 mm, 15.2 in, and was accompanied by a bayonet frog. Rifle grenade launcher. In 1942, an attachable rifle grenade launcher called the Gewehrgranatenschrei or Schießbecher, shooting cup, was introduced that was developed based on rifle grenade launcher models designed during World War I. The 30 mm Schießbecher cup-type rifle grenade launcher could be mounted on any Karabiner 98k and was intended to replace all previous rifle grenade launcher models. The rifle grenade launcher could be used against infantry, fortifications, and light armored vehicles up to a range of 280 m, 306 yd. For these differing tasks, several specialized grenades with accompanying special propelling cartridges were developed for the 1,450,113 produced Schießbecher rifle grenade launchers. The rifle grenade propelling cartridges fired a wooden projectile through the barrel to the rifle grenade that, upon impact, automatically primed the rifle grenade. The Schießbecher could be mounted on the Karabiner 98A, G98/40, STG44, and FG42. Suppressor. A removable, muzzle-mounted Hub 23 suppressor, visually resembling the Schießbecher, was manufactured for the Karabiner 98k. After several suppressor proposals from the firearms industry and the SS Waffen Academy, SS Weapons Academy, the Hub 23 was produced based on a design proposal by Unteroffizier Schatzel. The Hub 23 weighs 0.5 kilograms, 1.1 pounds, and is 180 mm, 7.1 in, long. The maximum effective range of a Karabiner 98k with a Hub 23 mounted and firing special subsonic Napatroni, near cartridge, reduced load ammunition with a muzzle velocity of 220 m/s, 722 feet/s, was 300 m, 330 yd. The use of the Hub 23 suppressor and subsonic ammunition resulted in a sound signature reduction by 75%. The Hub 23 suppressor and the special subsonic ammunition were mainly used by special forces units such as the Brandenburgers and snipers. Variants. Kriegsmodell. Starting in late 1944, Karabiner 98k production began transition to the Kriegsmodell, war model, variant. This version was simplified to increase the rate of production, removing the bayonet lug, cleaning rod, stock disc, which functions as a bolt disassembly tool, and other features deemed to be unnecessary. At least two transitional variants existed, which incorporated only some Kriegsmodell features, and some factories never switched to Kriegsmodell production at all. Sniper variant. For snipers, Karabiner 98k rifles selected for being exceptionally accurate during factory tests were fitted with a telescopic sight as sniper rifles. Karabiner 98k sniper rifles had an effective range of up to 1000 m, 1094 yd, when used by a skilled sniper. The German Zeiss Zielfire 4X, ZF39, telescopic sight had bullet drop compensation in 50 m, 55 yd, increments for ranges from 100 to 800 m, 109 to 875 yd, or in some variations from 100 to 1000 m, 109 to 1094 yd. There were ZF42, Zeiss Ziels X6X and Zielicht 8X telescopic sights by various manufacturers like the Ojak 4X and 6X, Hensoldt Dialaton 4X and Kals Heliavier 4X with similar features employed on Karabiner 98k sniper rifles. Several different mountings produced by various manufacturers were used. The Karabiner 98k was not designed to accept telescopic sights. Attaching such sights to a Karabiner 98k required machining by a skilled armorer. A telescopic sight mounted low above the center axis of the receiver will not leave enough space between the rifle and the telescopic sight body for unimpaired operation of the bolt handle or the three-position safety catch lever. This ergonomic problem was solved by mounting the telescopic sight relatively high above the receiver and sometimes modifying or replacing the safety operating lever or using an offset mounting to position the telescopic sight axis to the left side in relation to the receiver center axis. A common minor modification was replacing the stock butt plate with a waffled anti-slip sniper butt plate. Approximately 132,000 of these sniper rifles were produced by Germany. Paratrooper variants. Experimental versions of the Karabiner 98k intended for the German paratroopers that could be transported in shortened modes were produced. The standard Karabiner 98k was too long to be carried in a parachute drop. However, the German paratroopers made only limited combat drops after the 1941 Battle of Crete. There was therefore little need for these rifles. Specimens with folding stocks, clap shaft, and with detachable barrels, Abnehmbarer are known to have been produced at Mauser Oberndorf. G40K. The G40K with a total length of 1000 mm, 39.37 in, and a barrel length of 490 mm, 19.29 in, and 3.2 kg, 7.1 pounds, weight was a shortened experimental version of the Karabiner 98k. The rear tangent sight of the G40K was graduated for SS Patroni cartridges from 100 to 1000 in 100 increments. A batch of 82 G40K rifles was produced in 1941 at Mauser Oberndorf. Receiver codes. Karabiner 98k receivers were stamped with a factory code indicating date and location of manufacture. These codes were originally prefixed with S/ and suffixed with K for 1934 or G for 1935. The intervening numeric code indicated location. The 2 or 4-digit year of manufacture was stamped on the receiver ring instead of a letter suffix after 1935. The numeric codes were 27 for Ermawerke in Erfurt, 42 for Mauser in Oberndorf am Neckar, 147 for Sauer and Sohn in Seoul, 237 for Berlin Lübecker Maschinenfabrik in Lübeck, 243 for Mauser in Borsigwald, 337 for Gustloff-Werke in Weimar, 660 for Steyr-Daimler-Puch in Steyr, 945 for Waffen-Werke Brunn in Brno. The S/ prefix was dropped and letters were used for location codes beginning in 1937, although some manufacturers retained the numeric codes past that date. The letter codes were AR for Mauser in Borsigwald, AX for Ermawerke, BCD for Gustlaufwerke. BNZ for Sterdaimlerpuck. BSW for Berlin-Suller Waffen und Versuchwerke. BYF for Mauser in Oberndorf am Neckar. CE for Sauer and Sohn. DOT for Waffenwerke Brunn in Brno. DO for Waffenwerke Brunn in Bystrica. DUF for Berlin-Lübecker Maschinenfabrik. SVW 45 for Mauser 1945 production in Oberndorf am Neckar. SWP 45 for Waffenwerke Brunn 1945 production in Brno. Combined production by multiple manufacturers are indicated by two codes separated by a slash. German small arms doctrine. The Karabiner 98k had the same disadvantages as all other military rifles designed around the year 1900 in that it was comparatively bulky and heavy, having been created during a time when military doctrine centered around highly trained marksmen engaging at relatively long range. The rate of fire was limited by how quickly the bolt could be operated. Its magazine had only half the capacity of Great Britain's Lee Enfield series rifles, but being internal, it made the weapon more comfortable to carry at its point of balance. An experimental trench magazine was produced during World War I, originally intended only for the original Gür 98, but it could be made to work with all Model 98 variants, that could be attached to the bottom of the internal magazine by removing the floor plate, increasing capacity to 20 rounds, though it still required loading with 5-round stripper clips. While the Americans had standardized a semi-automatic rifle in 1936, the M1 Garand, the Germans maintained these bolt-action rifles due to their tactical doctrine of basing a squad's firepower on the general-purpose machine gun in the light machine gun roles, so that the role of the rifleman was largely to carry ammunition and provide covering fire for the machine gunners. The advantage of the general-purpose machine gun concept was that it added greatly to the overall volume of fire that could be put out by a squad-sized unit. They did experiments with semi-automatic rifles throughout the war and fielded the Gür 43/Karabiner 43 series, of which 402,713 were built, and introduced the first assault rifle in 1943, the MP43/MP44/STG-44 series, of which 425,977 were built. Due to the relatively limited production of semi-automatic and assault rifles, the Karabiner 98k remained the primary service weapon until the last days of the war, and was manufactured until the surrender in May 1945. In close combat, however, submachine guns were often preferred, especially for urban combat, where the rifle's range and low rate of fire were not very useful, although the rifle's powerful ammunition was better able to penetrate walls and other cover found in urban areas. Towards the end of the war, it was intended to phase out the Karabiner 98k in favor of the STG-44, which fired the 7.92 x 33 mm Kurz intermediate rifle round that was more powerful than the pistol cartridges of submachine guns, but that could be used like a submachine gun in close quarters and urban fighting. Production of the STG-44, being a late war weapon, was never sufficient to meet demand and did not came near the 1,500,000 ordered nor the 4 million planned. Usage history. Pre-World War II export. Though most Karabiner 98k rifles went to the German armed forces, the weapon was sold abroad in the years prior to World War II. In Portugal, a large quantity of Karabiner 98k rifles made by Mauser-Werke were adopted as the Espingarda 7,92 mm/937 Mauser infantry rifle. Other pre-war exports of Karabiner 98ks were to China, an unknown number of rifles 1935-38, and 20,000 in 1937 to China's then enemy, Japan. Exports of Karabiner 98ks decreased as war drew closer, as all available production capacity was needed to equip the German armed forces. World War II use. The Mauser Karabiner 98k rifle was widely used by all branches of the armed forces of Germany during World War II. It saw action in every theater of war involving German forces, including occupied Europe, North Africa, the Soviet Union, Finland, and Norway. Although comparable to the weapons fielded by Germany's enemies at the beginning of the war, its disadvantages in rate of fire became more apparent as American and Soviet armies began to field more semi-automatic weapons among their troops. Still, it continued to be the main infantry rifle of the Wehrmacht until the end of the war. Resistance forces in German-occupied Europe made frequent use of captured German Karabiner 98k rifles. The Soviet Union also made extensive use of captured Karabiner 98k rifles and other German infantry weapons due to the Red Army experiencing a critical shortage of small arms during the early years of World War II. Many German soldiers used the verbal expression Kars as the slang name for the rifle. Sweden ordered 5,000 Karabiner 98ks that were provided from the regular production run in 1939 for use as light anti-tank rifles under the designation Gewehr M/39, Rifle M/39, but it was soon evident that the penetration offered by the 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser was inadequate, and thus the Gewehr M/39 were rechambered to the 8 x 63 mm Patron M/32, which was a more powerful 8 mm cartridge specifically designed for long-range machine gun fire. Accordingly, the Karabiner 98ks were rechambered in Sweden for the 8 x 63 mm Patron M/32, and the internal box magazine of the M98 system was adapted to match the dimensionally larger 8 x 63 mm Patron M/32 cartridge, reducing the capacity to 4 rounds, and accepted into service as Panzervarn's Gewehr M/40. A muzzle brake was installed to reduce the excessive free recoil, and the resulting weapon was designated Gewehr M/40 in Swedish service. They were however also found to be unsatisfactory and were soon withdrawn from service, and sold off after WW2. Post-World War II use. Soviet capture. During World War II, the Soviet Union captured millions of Mauser Karabiner 98k rifles and refurbished them in various arms factories in the late 1940s and early 1950s. These rifles, referred to by collectors as RC, Russian capture, Mausers, can be identified by an X stamp on the left side of the receiver. The Soviet arsenals made no effort to match the rifle's original parts by serial number when reassembling them, and some metal parts, the cleaning rod, sight hood, and locking screws, omitted after rebuilding, and instead were melted down and recycled, presumably with the other parts that weren't suitable for reuse. Many of these rifles, along with the Mosin-Nagant rifle, served in conflicts after World War II. A considerable number of Soviet-captured Mauser Karabiner 98k rifles, as well as a number of Karabiner 98k rifles that were left behind by the French after the First Indochina War, were found in the hands of Viet Cong guerrillas and People's Army of Vietnam, NVA, soldiers by US, South Vietnamese, South Korean, Australian and New Zealand forces alongside Soviet bloc rifles like the Mosin-Nagant, the SKS, and the AK-47. Post-occupation service. In the years after World War II, a number of European nations on both sides of the Iron Curtain that were invaded and occupied by Nazi Germany used the Mauser Karabiner 98k rifle as their standard-issue infantry rifle, due to the large number of German weapons that were left behind by the Germans at the end of World War II. Nations like France and Norway used the Mauser Karabiner 98k rifle and a number of other German weapons in the years after World War II. France produced a slightly modified version of the Kar 98k in the French occupation zone of Germany in the immediate post-war period. The new manufacture Kar 98ks equipped some French units, including the French Foreign Legion that used them in Indochina for a limited time. These rifles were also used by the West German Border Guard. Norway's captured Karabiner 98k rifles were soon superseded as a standard-issue weapon by the US M1 Garand, but remained in service as Norwegian Home Guard weapons until at least the 1970s, in which role they were rebarreled for the .30-06 Springfield round used by the M1, with a small cutout in the receiver so that the slightly longer US round could still be loaded with stripper clips. These Norwegian conversions had a section of the receiver flattened on the upper left side, where a new serial number, with a prefix denoting the branch of service, was stamped. Some of these rifles' conversions were rechambered again to 7.62 x 51 mm NATO, but this program was cancelled with only a few thousand converted when Norway adopted the AG3, HNKG3, as a replacement for both the M1 and the K98K. Some actions from Mauser Karabiner 98k left by German armed forces in 1945 were used by Kongsberg Vapennfabrik, currently Kongsberg small arms, for building both military and civilian sniper/target rifles under the Kongsberg Vapenfabrik Skarpskyttergewehr M59, Mauser M59 and Kongsberg Vapenfabrik Skarpskyttergewehr M67, Mauser M67 designations. These rifles were used by the Norwegian armed forces up to the 2000s. In West Germany, the Karabiner 98k were issued to the Bundesgrenzschutz, BGS, English, Federal Border Guard, which was originally organized along paramilitary lines and armed as light infantry, in the 1950s. Former German Karabiner 98k rifles were widely distributed throughout the Eastern Bloc, some being refurbished 2 or 3 times by different factories. They were used by military and paramilitary forces, such as the East German combat groups of the working class, and were replaced by Soviet weapons in the 1960s. East German refurbished Karabiner 98ks featured Russian-style thicker blue finish, a sunburst-proof mark and sometimes had the factory designation 1001 applied, which was the factory where the refurbishment was carried out. Numbers were restamped to match the receiver and old numbers barred out. Numbers of East German and Czech refurbished Karabiner 98ks were exported to the West in the late 1980s and early 1990s and are now in the hands of collectors. Russian capture Karabiner 98ks were exported to the West in large numbers in the early and mid-2000s. Yugoslavian post-war refurbishment. Because of the lack of weapons after World War II, the Yugoslavian arms producer Crvena Zastava, nowadays Zastava Arms, refurbished German Karabiner 98k rifles that were left over or captured during the war. These rifles are readily identifiable as the German factory code markings have been scrubbed from the receiver and replaced with the Yugoslavian communist crest and the marking Pretuts 44 on the receiver's ring. In addition to this, if the refurbishment took place after 1950, the marking /48 was added to the mod 98 originally present on the left side of the receiver, becoming mod 98/48. The refurbished rifles were known also as Zastava M98/48s. The refurbished Pertuzi 44 Karabiner 98k rifles were still being used in the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s. Post-World War II derivatives. Many of the liberated European countries continued production of rifles similar to the Karabiner 98k, for example Fabrique Nationale, FN, in Belgium and Eskzbrahovka, CZ, in Czechoslovakia produced both their proprietary older models and brand new Karabiner 98k rifles, many of which were assembled from leftover German parts or using captured machinery. As with post-Nazi occupation service, post-war production of derivatives was a stopgap solution until enough numbers of more modern automatic rifles could be developed and produced. The vast majority of the 98k pattern rifles were soon stored as reserve weapons or given for very low prices to various fledgling states or rebel movements throughout the developing world. Both FN and CZ utilized a modified Kriegsmodell design, with the cleaning rod and stock disc omitted, but the bayonet lug restored. In Czechoslovakia it was known as P18 or Puka VZ.98N, the first being the manufacturer's cover designation of the type, the second official army designation, Rifle Model 98, Anfernmech, German. In Romania, the Czechoslovak version was known under the informal name of ZB, after Zbrahovka Brno, the Czechoslovak state producer of small weapons and munitions, and it was used to arm Romania's patriotic guards. Yugoslavian M48. From 1948 to 1965, Yugoslavian Zastava Arms produced a close copy of the Karabiner 98k imported between the wars from Fabrique Nationale called the Model 1948, which differed from the German rifle in that it had the shorter bolt action of the Yugoslav M1924 series of rifles, not to be confused with the widely distributed Czech VZ24, which had a standard length action, a thicker barrel profile. Yugoslavia had low chromium iron ore deposits, so they could not produce steel as hardened as the Krupp or Swedish steel used in other variants, and made up for it in adding extra material, and a rear sight enclosed in the wooden handguard. The German-style handguard began in front of the rear sight, unlike e.g. exports to South America that had a handguard and rear sight like the M48. A hunting variant of the Yugoslavian M48 is still produced by Zastava Arms. Spanish M43. The Spanish M43, produced in A Coruña until 1957, was a variant of the 98k with a straight bolt handle, a front sight guard and a handle groove in the front stock much like the earlier Reichspostgewehr. It was chambered in 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser caliber. When Spain began switching to the semi-automatic rifle, many M43 were converted to FR8 rifles for military training purposes and Guardia Civil service. Israeli Mauser. A number of non-European nations used the Mauser Karabiner 98k rifle as well as a few guerrilla organizations to help establish new nation-states. One example was Israel, who used the Mauser Karabiner 98k rifle from the late 1940s until the 1970s. The use of the Karabiner 98k to establish the nation-state of Israel often raises a lot of interest among people and rifle collectors today. Many Jewish organizations in Palestine acquired them from post-World War II Europe to protect various Jewish settlements from Arab attack as well as to carry out guerrilla operations against British Army forces in Palestine. The Haganah, which later evolved into the modern-day Israel Defense Forces, was one of the Jewish armed groups in Palestine that brought large numbers of Mauser Karabiner 98k rifles and other surplus arms, namely the British Lee Enfield bolt-action rifle, which was used on a large scale by these groups, and the Mosin Nagant from Europe during the post-World War II period. Many, though not all, Israeli-used German surplus Mauser Karabiner 98k rifles have had their Nazi Waffenamt markings and emblems stamped over with Israel Defense Forces, IDF, and Hebrew Arsenal markings. As the Arab-Israeli conflict approached, the Haganah and other Jewish forces in Palestine tried to get hold of as many weapons as they could in the face of an arms embargo by British colonial authorities. One of the most important purchases was a secret January 14, 1948, $12,280,000 worth contract with Czechoslovak government including 4,500 P-18 rifles, as well as 50,400,000 rounds of ammunition. Later, the newly established Israel Defense Forces ordered more numbers of Mauser Karabiner 98k rifles, produced this time by Fabrique Nationale. These have Israeli and Belgian markings on the rifle as well as the emblem of the IDF on the top of the rifle's receiver. The FN-made Karabiner 98k rifles with the IDF markings and emblem on the rifle were produced and sold to Israel after it established itself as an independent nation in 1948. At some point, Israel converted all other Mauser 98-based rifles in their inventory, most commonly Czechoslovak VZ-24 rifles, but small numbers of contract Mausers from sources ranging from Ethiopia to Mexico were also known to have come into Israeli hands, to the now standardized Karabiner 98k configuration. The original receiver markings of these conversions were not altered, making it easy for collectors to identify their origin. The Israeli Karabiner 98k utilized the same bayonet design as in German service, with a barrel ring added. The Israeli bayonets were a mix of converted German production and domestically produced examples. During the late 1950s, the IDF converted the caliber of their Mauser Karabiner 98k rifles from the original German 7.92 x 57 mm Mauser round to 7.62 x 51 mm NATO following the adoption of the FN FAL rifle as their primary rifle in 1958. The Israeli Mauser Karabiner 98k rifles that were converted have 7.62 engraved on the rifle receiver. Rifles with original German stocks have 7.62 burned into the heel of the rifle stock for identification and to separate the 7.62 NATO rifles from the original 7.92 mm versions of the weapon still in service or held in reserve. Some Karabiner 98k rifles were fitted with new, unnumbered beech stocks of recent manufacture, while others retained their original furniture. All of these converted rifles were proof-fired for service. The IDF employed a 22 mm rifle grenade adapter for the Mauser K98k rifle. The Karabiner 98k rifle was used by the reserve branches of the IDF well into the 1960s and 1970s and saw action in the hands of various support and line of communications troops during the 1967 Six-Day War and the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. After the rifle was retired from reserve military service, the Israeli Mauser Karabiner 98k was given to a number of Third World nations as military aid by Israel during the 1970s and 1980s, and sold as ex-military surplus on the open market, with many Israeli Mausers being exported to Australia. The Israeli Mauser is the most predominant variant of the Mauser Kar98k rifle on the Australian surplus firearms market today, and the United States during the 1970s and 1980s. The Israeli Mausers provided to Third World armies began to themselves be imported for civilian sale in the United States, and tend to be in significantly worse condition than those sold directly out of Israeli storage. Contemporary use. The Bundeswehr still.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.